that give their pastors and staff sabbaticals show a care and a level of health in the church that not all churches have. It's a rare, beautiful thing, and we're very grateful. I want to say thank you to Chris Lehigh, because Chris had a lot of extra work on his plate when I was not here, and I'm really, really grateful for that. I want to say thank you to Kristen Hirsch and Ron Seeger and Zach Deem for being a kind of interim pastoral care team when I was gone. Really, really appreciate that. I want to say thank you to Brandon Hershey and Kirk Marks and Jeff Byerly and Emily Marks for preaching when I was gone. Really, really, we feel blessed by how many people made this possible, and we thank you. Very, very grateful. And it was good in so many ways. It was surprising in some ways. It was sometimes difficult, sometimes different from my previous sabbatical. In 2018, during that previous sabbatical, none of our 4 kids were married. None had even graduated college. And now we have 2 college graduate married kids, 2 grandkids, and we have a grandbaby due this past Friday that's still not here yet. And we're waiting. 3 of our kids are working full time. 1 is still in college. And so this sabbatical was much more of an empty nester sabbatical. And that was a very good thing. We like the empty nest a lot. After 15 years of parenting teenagers, some of you know what it feels like to be in the empty nest. It's a good thing. In 2018, which was when I had my previous sabbatical, I also had not even started doctoral studies. Conestoga Valley Seeds, which Michelle is working with now, was just a dream. I was teaching online courses for LBC, but never had been in the classroom for a while. So we're very different people now than we were then, 7 years ago. And that's normal. Change is a necessary part of growth. And so let me say a few words about sabbatical before I get into our scripture passage for today. On our last Sunday before my sabbatical, I handed out a sabbatical plan. Kind of gave us an overview of what we expected to do during those 3 months. And for the most part, we stuck to the plan. We did 3 short trips, all of which were really, really wonderful times away. 1 in Connecticut, 1 in North Carolina, 1 in Texas. Each of those 3 trips was a gift from friends that were just so meaningful. They were life-giving. They were full of laughter, full of honest conversation about our lives and their lives. Just those kinds of real, honest, deep conversations that are so precious and meaningful. We're so grateful for that time that we had face-to-face with dear friends, longtime friends. Each of them we hadn't seen in years, and so that was a real blessing. I did 6 sessions of counseling, which was paid for by the denomination. Very grateful for that. It was helpful. I wouldn't say it was anything earth-shattering, but it was really helpful. I also had spiritual direction. Michelle continued her work with Conestoga Valley Seeds, and actually in the past few weeks, we have both been doing ESL, English as a Second Language classes with Seeds on Mondays and Wednesday evenings. Michelle is directing, and I teach a class. I've also been teaching my Interpreting the Bible class at Messiah University. It's something I've been doing for a number of years now. And that is 3 hours each Tuesday evening. And my daughter Megan is in the course, which is a real blessing. So Megan and I meet for dinner each week, most often in Messiah's dining hall. And I wanted to ask, how many of you have ever had that plan of life where your family kind of had the same meals each week? Maybe there was a Monday meal, a Tuesday meal, so on. Maybe not. Well, Messiah does. And that means on Tuesday evenings, I have been eating a lot of curry. And I will say, it's delicious curry. I love it. Over dinner, Meg and I sit there, and she gives me kind of like her update download of how things are going in her life over the week. And by the way, have any of you seen in the news that Messiah University was in the news this past week because of hazing? Anyone see that? Maybe? I heard the backstory. Let me tell you. Interesting. I'll talk about that another time. On Wednesdays, Michelle and I have been able to watch our grandkids, which has been a delight, just to spend the whole day with those two little ones and get very tired. I did some house projects. I did interview with Chestnut Housing, but I didn't do as many as I thought. I only actually was able to get one interview with a person who was a volunteer, and that was published in their newsletter. And I hope that I can continue to do that, because Chestnut Housing is a local organization that's trying to provide below market rate housing for people in our community. And the newest project is happening just down the road in Bridgeport. Really, really wonderful heart in this organization. And so I hope to continue to have some of those interviews. One of the projects I thought I was going to do over sabbatical was help my in-laws downsize. Did not really happen, except one day we did a little bit of that. But I did some other things. I discovered the app that the Lancaster Public Library uses to make ebooks available for free. It is super cool, and I read a lot of books. I wish I could have read more. I just love reading. I read some dystopian novels. Maybe you've heard of The Handmaid's Tale, or The Man in the High Castle, or one by Sinclair Lewis 100 years ago written called It Can't Happen Here. All of them sounded eerily like our contemporary world today. Fascinating. I read a novella called Something About Paying Attention by a writer by the name of David Foster Wallace. It is a fantastic little book. Highly recommend it. I especially think teenagers should read this book. It's gripping, really, really interesting. And believe it or not, it's about accounting. You would never imagine that it's that interesting. It is super interesting. I read some theology, some books about spirituality, some memoirs, some biographies, some classics. I read Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, which really reminded me of the biblical book of Ecclesiastes. So I read the book of Ecclesiastes, and that is just powerful. If you haven't read the biblical book of Ecclesiastes in years, I encourage you, pull that thing out. You can read it this afternoon. It's not long, and it is just rich, and I think speaks powerfully to our day and age. I read nearly all of something called the Apocrypha. You know what I'm talking about? Have you ever heard that Catholic Bibles have some other books that Protestant Bibles don't have? It's called the Apocrypha. And I read the whole thing. It had been a long time since I read any of those books, and some I'd never read before. And I just want to say this, they're really, really good. I really appreciated them. Some of them is just history. Some of them are just really interesting ancient books. Protestants do not believe they're up to the same level as the 66 books of the Bible. And there's reasons for that, but they were excellent. Speaking of the Catholic Church, I read Pope Francis's autobiography. Francis is the Pope who just died earlier this year. That bio is so good. I wish we had a lot more leaders like Pope Francis in our whole society all over the place, whether in politics or religion or elsewhere. This past June, I began a 2-year term as the president of the Conestoga Valley Ministerium. I've been a part of the ministerium for 15 years and never served in that role, and it's something where people take turns doing it, and I thought, well, I should take a turn. That continued over sabbatical, and the ministerium has been having some really interesting discussions, such as what should a ministerium even be? And what should a ministerium do? I represented the ministerium at the Conestoga Valley Bonfire, saw some of you there. And then I got involved in something that I didn't even know was going to happen before sabbatical, and that's called Roundabout CV. Some of you have heard from me about this, and I think I contacted all of you who actually live in Conestoga Valley, because or most of you. I'm looking around the room now, I see some maybe I didn't contact. I can't remember all of it. But Roundabout CV is a new experimental news source, hyper-local. It's only for Conestoga Valley residents, and it's only about what's happening in Conestoga Valley. It's in development, and they're hoping to launch the beta, which is like the first experimental launch this month, with a full launch happening in the spring. Because as you know, it's tough to know what to trust in the news anymore, right? There's a lot of talk about fake news and can I trust this news source or that news source? And the hyper-local news sources that we use are like Instagram or Facebook, but a lot of times those things are just so loaded full of junk that they're super frustrating. And so this is a new experiment, and we'll see how it goes. I don't know. During sabbatical, I also thought a lot about pastoral ministry, about church in general, about our church, about Christianity in America in this particular fraught age that we live in. And my first sermon series, not including today, I want to start next week, is going to be about that. It's going to revolve around two of Jesus' foundational teachings in the Gospel of John. Two words from the title of a song I learned in Sunday school years ago when I was a kid. Trust and obey. So often we emphasize one over above the other. And I'm interested to talk about that. But today, I want to talk about something that I learned about myself during sabbatical. I've been struggling with discontent, just like Kristen introduced for us. Ours is a culture that is largely run on discontentment. New phones every year promising life-changing improvements, so you should be discontent with your old phone. New gadgets for every task under the sun promising the good life, so you should be discontent without them. Whether it's your vacuum cleaner, your clothes dryer, your car, or just about anything. New clothing styles, that's been going on for decades, even centuries, right? New fads that leave us discontent. New entertainment, sports betting, politics. You could just go on and on and on about all these things in our culture that leave us feeling discontent. Because it taps into this promise of the good life, that we're empty inside. Something's missing, and we need whatever that is that they're selling, that they're offering, that they're developing and inventing, because then that emptiness inside will be filled. It could be the new TV show or the new season of the TV show, the new medicine, the new politician. It's going to solve our fears and our doubts. Have you felt discontentment? Actually, I thought maybe this would be a good chance. Let's just share real quick. Does anyone here want to share? How have you felt discontentment? Emily. Yeah. And with fashion, if you just wait like 25, 30 years, it's back. So, all you need is really one particular style, and every 30 years, you'll be in. Good, yeah. Anybody else want to share? What is particularly difficult for you to feel that? Money, thank you. Yes, I'm going to talk about that for me in just a moment. Money, we can always feel that we're just, especially when stuff keeps breaking or the bills keep coming, and oh my gosh. It's a good one. I think that one probably resonates with 99.9% of everybody here. Any others that you have felt some discontentment about? Linda. Oh, what you say? Cars? Yeah, right. I hear that. Every year they keep coming out with newer, cooler ones too that make us feel like, oh, if I only had that. Linda?
This summer, most of you know I'm retired and he had to have a company phone all of his working years, so we had to go get him a personal phone, and he got the newest iPhone. And I'm still playing with my iPhone 10, and the battery only lasts out a day, and I was a little jealous.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I'll never forget, there was a pastor in the ministerium where every ministerium meeting he'd pull out his phone, and it was an iPhone. It had to be one of the first or second models. I'm like, wow, how's that? That's 15 some years ago, right? It's still going. Crazy. I was with my parents yesterday, and they were talking about their freezer. Their freezer is the same age as me. They have a Sears freezer from 1974. Going strong. Don't make them like that anymore, do they? Crazy. Well, thank you for sharing that. Discontentment hit me last week. It hits me more than last week, believe me, but I want to tell you a story about last week. Our dog cut himself really badly. It was a crazy fluke accident. And it was kind of dramatic. Our daughter was home on fall break when it happened, and let's just say there were big emotions. We learned, or when I saw it, I was like, oh, this is beyond my ability. We called the vet, they got in an emergency appointment and learned that that cut was severe enough it needed surgery to fix it. Yeah, I was thinking, let's just throw a few stitches on here. No, it wasn't. It was surgery, and he had to stay overnight. You maybe well know what veterinary surgery costs. Yeah. When Michelle told me the price, I immediately felt discontent and discouraged. As I mentioned, I've been teaching this Bible class at Messiah as an adjunct professor, for which I am paid. I start calculating in my mind the amount of hours I spend on that course, in travel, in teaching, in prep, in grading, in emails. You know how it goes. And then I figure out what my hourly income is for that course. Then I compare that to the hourly rate for that surgery on our dog. Guess which hourly rate is higher? It's not even close. That's a dose of reality that can ruin an afternoon, maybe a whole day or two. I'm sure you know the feeling. You start thinking thoughts like, it's not fair. Our society values the wrong things. On and on we can go, wallowing in discontentment. And so turn with me to Philippians chapter 4. I forgot to mark which page it is in the Pew Bible. Getting back into my rhythm. In fact, when I walked into my office this morning, opened up the iPad to load it up, the app was out of date that I use. The battery was at 2%. I'm like, okay. 953, page 953, thank you. Philippians chapter 4. We're going to start reading at verse 10. Paul says this, I rejoiced greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. That last sentence, the I can do all this, verse 13, super famous. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. A lot of people know that verse, quote it. Several other translations say it this way, I can do all things through him who gives me strength. Usually it's quoted just like that, all by itself, completely ripped out of its context. I see it often in social media. Sometimes it's even shortened a little bit, just simply, I can do all things. Or sometimes it's just a person with a picture and they put all things on there. Maybe they're doing something difficult. Maybe it's like rock climbing or starting up a new business. And they show themselves with this photo of whatever they're doing, and they'll put all things on it. Or maybe like, all things, baby. And they know that they can put that because so many people get the reference. It's such a famous verse. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. So the words, all this or all things, could lead us to believe that Paul is literally talking about anything. But we need to read that context. We can't just rip this verse out of the context and think that that's what he means. Like a promise to do anything? There's a context there. There's surrounding verses. Paul is not trying to say, God will empower you to do literally anything you want. Paul is saying that God wants to empower you, but for a specific set of things that he's already talked about. And I think this can be really instructive for us, because we can say that we are trusting God for a variety of things in our lives. Like, Lord, I'm trusting you to help me get that parking spot in the first row at the mall because I'm running late and I need to get in and get out really fast. Or, Lord, I'm trusting you to transform this difficult situation in my life. Now, compared to trusting God about getting a parking space, trusting God to transform a difficult situation in our life does sound like a pretty good thing, right? But read between the lines with me a little bit here. What do we mean when we say, I am trusting you, God, to transform this situation, this person, this, you fill in the blank with the difficult situation in your life, something that you want to be changed? What we mean usually is, God, I want you to override that person's free will because I can't take it anymore. But that kind of trusting in God is not something that he ever said he would do. That's why we need to hear what Paul is actually saying here. So what is Paul saying that God will do? How will he empower us in the midst of those circumstances? When we put verse 13 back into its context, God will strengthen us not in all things, but in a specific set of things. That is the all this that he was talking about. So let's go back up to verse 10. I already read all of this, but let's kind of really look at this context. In verse 10, Paul talks about rejoicing. And it's not just any normal rejoicing. He says, I rejoice greatly. And actually, the word there, greatly, could be translated as mega intense. When's the last time you rejoiced in the Lord in a way that could be described as mega intense? Has there ever been a time? And I ask that about myself, because I remember being in Guyana, South America in the summer between my junior and senior year of college. I was there on a missionary internship for 13 weeks that summer. The people at the time were living in these dilapidated shacks on dirt roads, working in the brutal heat and humidity of a tropical climate, cutting sugarcane. And in some cases, they weren't making it. And yet, in their worship services, on Sundays, they would be belting out praise to the Lord with mega intensity. I'll never forget it. The first time I was in one of their worship services and I heard them singing, I thought to myself, why are they singing so loud? This is strange. You know why I thought that? Because it was obviously so different from how my church back in Lancaster would sing. Now, of course, I am not suggesting that rejoicing in the Lord can only occur inside church buildings during worship services. I'm also not saying that rejoicing in the Lord only or always involves singing. There are so many ways to rejoice in the Lord. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 10:31 that whatever we do, even this really basic stuff that we do all the time, like eating and drinking, he says, do it all to the glory of God. So we can and should worship a lot. And yet do we? Do we worship God, thank God, praise God, without the assistance of our worship leaders or worship songs throughout all these parts of our lives, because there is literally so much that we have to be thankful to God for? Do our hearts bend toward praising God with mega intensity? Or do our hearts get stuck in critique, conspiracy, criticism? That's the first good question that we need to really dwell on if we want to think about contentment in the midst of any circumstances. But we also need to ask, why is Paul rejoicing here? He says he's rejoicing with mega intensity. Why? Well, because there were Christians living in the city of Philippi. These are the people he's writing to in this letter, who he says renewed their concern for him. That word renew could be translated revive. It's really a word picture of a flower that's blooming. You know the process. The seed is completely dead, and through the beauty of nature, it blooms into this incredible flower. Something that was dead has now come to life. And specifically, Paul says what was dead is that they are now showing this new, blooming concern for him. He's talking about a generous donation. They had given him financial help to keep him going. And the situation is this: he was on house arrest. When he was writing this letter to them, you can read a little bit about how he describes it earlier in chapter 1 of Philippians. And in the Roman Empire, when you were on house arrest, it wasn't like the Roman government was going to pay for you and take care of you. It did not work like that. You were on your own. Paul was only able to remain on house arrest and have his needs cared for because his friends helped him. They sent him money. So you can see why he is rejoicing mega intensely here. It was the Philippians' generosity, which meant that they were not just giving money, they were thinking about him. They remembered him. They figured out what he was going through, and they sacrificially gave out of their personal funds to help him. And that reality gives Paul this opportunity to share some further thoughts about his circumstances. He says he has learned to be content with whatever is happening. And then he describes some of those circumstances. Remember that he's writing this while he's on house arrest. Sometimes he says his circumstances were humble, like people of low status, kind of like what he was feeling as he was literally writing this on house arrest. But then he can also remember that it's not always that way. Sometimes he was remembering the situations of abundance where there's loads of leftovers. That's what we would say there is more than enough. And then to all of these kinds of situations in his life, he says, I have learned the secret to being content. And it's come through personal experience. Paul has not always had it good. Now, my paraphrase of what he says here is this: I have learned the secret of being content whether I've had a smorgasbord amount of food to stuff my body to the gills, like down the road at Burdenham, or whether I'm so hungry it feels like my stomach is an empty hole. Whether my life has abundance or whether I feel like I'm constantly struggling to catch up. No matter the situation, he says he has learned the secret of being content. What does he mean, content? What is contentment? I totally didn't realize that this Sunday morning was going to be the first Sunday morning of the month, and therefore we were going to have a new fruit of the Spirit, and that fruit of the Spirit was going to be joy. And I don't know if you heard the description that Kristen read about joy, that deep inner peace, very similar to the idea of contentment. In fact, when I was researching it, it's being at peace, it's being satisfied. And when I read those words and I think deeply about them, they very much reflect back to me like a mirror, and I realize I am so often not like that. Can struggle with being discontent. Can struggle to have peace in the midst of these difficult circumstances. Because so often it is the circumstances that make me feel bad. It's very normal, right? Paul says he's learned the secret of being content no matter the circumstances. So what is the secret? Because life is going to be filled with all kinds of difficult situations that leave us feeling a variety of levels of discontent, from irritation to full-blown crisis. What is the secret to finding that peace and satisfaction deep within us in the midst of the highs and the lows of life? The secret goes back to verse 13. We've now come full circle. Now that we know the context of verse 13, we can understand this important verse a lot better. The secret to contentment in any circumstance is God's strength. God's strength is not for the purpose of doing whatever we want or getting whatever we want, or a promise that God will override people's free will and change our earthly circumstances however we want. Paul's point is that the secret to being content, whether life is amazing or whether life is horrible, is God's strength with us in the midst of any circumstance. Strength for what? Strength to do the next right thing. Strength to live the fruit of the Spirit when we don't feel like it. Continue to go back to the fruit of the Spirit as one of the highest expressions of what it looks like to be a disciple of Jesus in the midst of the difficulty of life. I mean, think about whatever difficulty it is that you are going through. What does it look like to be a person of love in that? Joy, peace, patience, gentleness, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, and self-control, which might be the hardest one of all when we're lacking contentment. It's strength to redirect our focus on God and rejoice in the midst of the difficulties. Now I want us to peek back a little bit further, because I think in the passage that comes right before what we read, Paul has even more practical suggestions for us. Look at verses 4 through 9, and notice how practical he gets here, like some really good ideas that you can implement into your life. Verse 4, be people who rejoice. There is something about coming here on Sunday mornings and singing songs together that redirects our focus, that helps us to transform discontent into content. I'm not saying it's the perfect solution. I'm not saying that coming to church is going to solve all your problems, but it can help us to focus on who God is. Verse 5, live with gentleness to all. It's another one of those fruit of the Spirit that Paul points out. Because in the middle of content, or in the middle of discontent, it can be hard to be gentle. And we can just revert to outrage, revert to critique, revert to complaint. Live with gentleness. Verses 6 and 7, this is a key one. He says, be prayerful in all circumstances with thanksgiving. What can it look like to be thankful in the midst of your discontent? That's hard, right? One author I've read suggests that Christians would do well to wake up and the first thing every morning, whether it's a note on your phone or something you write in a journal or maybe just a prayer to God, list out 5 things you're thankful for. And that simple practice can transform your outlook. And it might be as simple as, thank you, God, for this coffee. Verse 8, think about what is good and true and beautiful and right. Because so often when we're discontent, we are fixated on what is ugly and unfair and nasty and wrong. Verse 9, practice doing what godly people do. And this all requires intentionality, practice, building new habits. And usually building new habits takes time and repetition and failure and trying again and more failure and trying again and over. Habit works like that. It takes being around those people who will encourage these habits of contentment. And maybe that's a key thing there. Are the people in your life actually pushing you to be discontent? Not that you shouldn't be friends with them, not that you shouldn't hang out with them, but it's something to be aware of. Maybe even to be the person who pushes them to be content. If God is directing us to live this life of contentment, and I think this passage clearly shows He is, then it's for our good and the good of others around us. To learn the secret of contentment is good. It's for our good. It means we'll be in a better situation than in the situation of discontentment. And I think so many of us know that intuitively. Like, we don't actually want to be discontent, but sometimes we feel stuck. Feel like we just can't get out of it. And if we've been wallowing in the discontent long enough, it can become normalized in our lives, and even we can start to like it. Contentment, though, rages against that and says, no, there's a better way. It's for our good. To learn the secret of contentment is for our good. And actually, dwelling in the discontentment of our culture is not for our good. So it is worth the work. It is worth the practice over and over again to implement what Paul is saying in our lives, to learn to be people who have learned the secret of contentment. I hope you don't hear me saying that I think this is something easy, that I just totally figured this out over sabbatical and yep, we're now going to shoot to the moon. No. It's a lifelong battle in many cases. But what Paul is saying here is so good. Let us be people who learn the secret of contentment in any circumstance.